It was a small town surrounded by green hills and narrow dusty roads where everyone seemed to know each other. Life there moved slowly. People lived simple lives, going to work in the morning and returning home before sunset. In one of the small houses near the town's edge lived a boy named Amir with his mother. Their house was old, but it was filled with warmth. His mother worked long hours at a nearby shop, trying to make ends meet after his father's death 2 years earlier. Amir, only 12, was quiet but observant. He rarely spoke much, yet there was something deep in his eyes, like he had seen more than any boy his age should have. Most mornings began the same way. The alarm clock would ring at 6 and Amir would wake before his mother called him. He would fold his blanket neatly, brush his teeth, and help her make tea. The smell of cardamom would fill the small kitchen. They didn't have much, but they shared every small joy. His mother often smiled at him while pouring tea into their chipped cups and said softly, "We may not have everything, but we have peace." Amir would nod, forcing a smile. Deep inside, he knew there was something eating away at that peace, something he could not bring himself to talk about. At school, Amir blended in with the crowd. He wasn't the loudest nor the smartest, but he was respectful. Teachers liked his manners. He spent most breaks sitting quietly under a tree, sketching in his notebook. He loved drawing mountains, birds, faces. Sometimes he would draw his father's face from memory. His classmates often teased him for being too quiet, but he didn't mind. He had learned to stay silent to avoid attention. One morning during assembly, the principal announced a competition for the best essay on honesty. Amir stood in line, listening half-heartedly. The word honesty echoed in his mind like a whisper he couldn't ignore. It made him uneasy, almost restless. That night, as he sat at his small study table, the paper before him stayed blank. The ceiling fan made a low humming sound and the lamp's light flickered. He picked up his pencil several times but couldn't bring himself to write. What could he possibly say about honesty when he himself was hiding a truth that burned inside him every single day? His mother came into the room and noticed his empty page. "Can't think of what to write?" she asked kindly. He nodded. She smiled and said, "Just write what you feel. The truth always finds its way when the heart is clean." Then she patted his head and went back to finish her chores. Her words lingered in his mind long after she left. The next day, something unusual happened at school. During class, his teacher, a kind woman who had taught him for 2 years, noticed Amir looking pale and distracted. After class, she asked him to stay behind. When everyone left, she sat beside him and asked softly, "Is something bothering you?" Amir looked down at his hands. He wanted to say no, but something inside him was crumbling. "You can tell me," she continued gently. Sometimes sharing helps. Amir's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, but words wouldn't come out. His eyes filled with tears, and before he could stop them, one rolled down his cheek. The teacher looked worried. "It's okay," she said. "Take your time." But Amir just shook his head, stood up quickly, and left the room. That afternoon he walked home slower than usual, dragging his feet through the dust. He kept replaying her words in his head. "You can tell me." But could he? Would anyone even believe him if he did? Days passed. Amir tried to act normal, but something had changed. His sleep was broken. He often woke up sweating, feeling like someone was watching him. He didn't tell his mother because he didn't want to burden her. She already had enough worries. But one evening, as they sat eating dinner, she noticed his trembling hands. "You're not eating properly these days," she said softly. "Are you sick?" He quickly said, "No, just tired." She didn't push further, but her eyes showed concern. That night he sat by the window, looking at the moon. The street outside was quiet. The air was cool. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Amir closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "If I tell the truth, will it change anything?" The question echoed in his heart. The truth he carried wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger, something that could shatter the peaceful image of the town. The next morning, when he went to school, he found himself unable to focus. During recess, he saw his teacher talking to a few other students and laughing softly. She seemed kind and patient, like someone who truly cared. Something in Amir's heart told him to trust her. After school, he waited until everyone left and approached her desk. "Miss," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised to see him still there. "Yes, Amir?" He hesitated, his lips trembling. "Can I tell you something?" he whispered. Her face softened. "Of course. Sit down." Amir looked around to make sure no one was there. Then he sat, his hands shaking slightly. For a few seconds, he said nothing. The teacher didn't rush him. She waited. Finally, Amir began to speak in a low voice. His words were slow at first, broken by long pauses. But once he started, he couldn't stop. He told her something that had been buried inside him for months, something that made his nights sleepless and his days heavy. The teacher listened without interrupting. Her face turned pale as she realized the weight of what the boy was saying. When he finished, tears filled his eyes. "I didn't want to say anything," he said softly, "but it hurts to keep it inside." The room was silent for a long moment. The teacher took a deep breath and said, "You did the right thing by telling me. You're very brave." But deep down she knew this was going to change everything. That evening she went to the principal's office to report what Amir had told her. The principal listened carefully, his expression shifting from surprise to disbelief. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes," the teacher replied firmly. "I have no reason to think he's lying." The principal sighed and rubbed his forehead. The person Amir had mentioned was someone respected in town, someone people trusted deeply. It wasn't going to be easy. By the next morning, whispers had already started spreading around school. No one knew the full story, but rumors traveled fast in a small town. Amir noticed people looking at him differently. Some kids avoided him. Others whispered behind his back. He tried to ignore it, but his stomach felt tight all day. When he got home, his mother was waiting, looking worried. "What happened at school today?" she asked. "Someone came to see me from there." Amir froze. His heart began to race. He didn't know what to say. He feared that maybe telling the truth had made everything worse. But his mother sat beside him, held his hand and said, "They said you were brave." Her voice trembled. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." That was the first time Amir cried openly in front of her since his father's death. The fear, the guilt, and the relief all came pouring out. That night, the town felt different. Some people were talking in hushed tones near the tea stall. Others were messaging each other, trying to confirm what they'd heard. A few were angry, saying it was impossible. Others said maybe the boy was telling the truth. No one really knew what to believe, but one thing was clear. The peace of that small town had been shaken. Amir didn't understand the full scale of what was happening. He only knew that he had finally said what was buried in his heart. It was terrifying, but also freeing. He didn't know what would happen next, but deep inside he felt lighter. As he lay in bed that night, he looked at his mother sleeping beside him and whispered, "I told the truth." The words were soft, almost lost in the sound of the night breeze. He didn't know that those simple words would soon reach beyond their small town, across the country, and change everything. The next few days were filled with silence that felt heavier than words. Amir didn't know exactly what his teacher had done after he told her the truth, but he could sense that something had changed. When he walked into school, whispers followed him. Some students stared, others looked away quickly. Even a few teachers avoided meeting his eyes. He didn't understand why people were acting so differently, but he could feel it. His truth had started to spread. That afternoon, the principal called Amir and his mother to the office. When they arrived, the room was quiet. His teacher was there too, sitting beside the principal. Amir's mother looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly. The principal cleared his throat and said, "Amir, we want to thank you for being honest. It takes courage to speak up, but we also want you to know this matter will have to be handled carefully." Amir looked at his mother, confused. She squeezed his hand gently, trying to comfort him. The principal continued, "There are certain people who won't be happy with what's been said. We just need to make sure you both are safe." Amir didn't fully understand what danger they were talking about, but the look on his mother's face said it all. This was serious. By the evening, news had already reached parts of town that something big had happened at the school. People gathered in small groups outside shops and corners, speaking in low voices. Some said it was nonsense. Others said if the boy really spoke the truth, it meant a respected person wasn't what everyone thought he was. The air was filled with tension. For the first time in years, the town didn't feel peaceful. Amir's mother tried to keep life normal at home. She told him to keep studying, to stay calm. But inside she was scared. She didn't have much, just a small job and a rented house. And now her child had spoken against someone powerful. That night she couldn't sleep. Every small sound outside made her heart race. She turned to look at Amir, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. and whispered a silent prayer for his safety. 2 days later, a car stopped outside their home. A man in a formal suit stepped out holding a file. He said he was from the district office. Amir's mother invited him in politely, though she looked uneasy. The man spoke in a calm, official tone. "We've received a report from the school about your son. We will be conducting an inquiry. Please don't speak to anyone about it until it's complete." Amir's mother nodded, agreeing quietly. But after he left, she sat down on the sofa and buried her face in her hands. She knew what this meant. The story was no longer just a school issue. It had gone beyond their control. That evening, Amir's teacher came to visit. She brought some snacks and sat with them for a while. Her presence brought a little comfort. She said gently, "You did the right thing, Amir. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." His mother looked worried. "But people have started talking," she said. "They say things I don't even want my son to hear." The teacher sighed. "They'll talk. That's what people do. But truth doesn't hide forever." In the following days, a few reporters showed up near the school gate. They tried to ask questions, but the principal refused to give details. He told everyone to keep the matter private, but someone had already leaked parts of the story online. It spread fast. Within a week, local news channels picked it up. Amir's face wasn't shown, but his story, "A boy from a small town speaks the truth," was all over the headlines. At first, Amir didn't realize how big it had become. But one morning, as his mother was going to work, she saw people pointing at her and whispering. When she entered the shop, a coworker said softly, "I saw something about your boy on the news. Is it true?" His mother didn't answer. She just smiled weakly and went back to her work. That evening, when she came home, she locked the door and sat quietly. "Things are getting out of hand," she said. "People are calling me brave, but I just want peace." Amir didn't know what to say. He didn't want to cause her pain, yet he couldn't take back what he had said. That night, he told her, "I didn't mean to make trouble. I just didn't want to keep it inside anymore." She hugged him tightly and said, "I know, my son. You did what was right. But sometimes right things bring storms before they bring calm." Days turned into weeks and the small town turned restless. Some people started showing support for Amir's truth. They said it was time someone spoke up. Others got angry, saying the boy was being used or manipulated. A few even said his story was a lie. The divide grew. It wasn't just a story anymore. It had become a topic everyone argued about. The turning point came when one of the national TV channels decided to cover it. They didn't reveal names, but said a young schoolboy's confession had led to an official investigation into a respected figure in the area. Overnight, the quiet town became the center of national attention. Journalists arrived. Camera crews parked near the school and social media buzzed with opinions. Hashtags trended and thousands of people started discussing Amir's bravery online. For Amir, life changed completely. He stopped going to school for a while because the attention was too much. Even when he stepped outside to buy something, people stared. Some smiled and whispered kind words, but others gave him cold looks. His mother decided to move temporarily to her sister's house in another town until things settled. They packed their few belongings in silence. As they left, Amir looked back at the small house that had been their home for years. It felt like he was leaving a part of himself behind. At his aunt's place, things were quieter, but the story didn't leave them. Reporters kept calling and officials kept checking in. Amir's mother's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Sometimes she turned it off just to find peace. Amir spent most of his time indoors reading or drawing. But every now and then, he would look out the window and wonder what people were saying about him now. Then one evening, while they were having dinner, the news on TV showed an update on his case. The reporter said new evidence had surfaced and the government had decided to take the investigation to a higher level. Amir's mother froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Amir watched silently, realizing how far things had gone. It was no longer just about him, it was now about justice, truth, and power. The next day, a message arrived from the district office, requesting that Amir and his mother come to the city to give an official statement. His mother's hands trembled as she held the letter. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Amir looked at her, then nodded. His voice was calm but firm when he said, "If I started it, I should finish it." That night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake staring at the ceiling. His heart was full of fear but also courage. He didn't know what awaited them in the city, but deep inside he felt he was walking the right path. Somewhere he remembered his mother's words, "Truth brings storms before calm," and for the first time he truly understood what that meant. The following morning, they packed their bags and left for the city. The bus moved slowly through the misty roads, and Amir watched the hills fade into the distance. He didn't know that his journey from that quiet town to the city would not just change his life, but would shake an entire nation awake. The bus ride to the city felt long and quiet. Amir sat beside his mother, staring out the window as trees, hills, and small villages passed by. The air inside the bus was heavy with the smell of diesel and dust. His mother sat still, her hands tightly folded in her lap, eyes filled with worry. Every now and then she looked at Amir and gave a small smile, trying to be strong for him. Neither of them said much, but their silence was filled with thoughts they didn't dare speak aloud. When they reached the city, the noise and lights overwhelmed Amir. Cars honked endlessly. People rushed across the streets, and buildings stretched high into the sky. It was so different from their quiet town. They checked into a small guest house near the government building, where Amir was supposed to give his statement. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying everything in his mind. The day he told his teacher, the faces of people whispering at school, the reporters outside. It all felt like a dream he couldn't wake up from. The next morning, a black car arrived to pick them up. Inside were two officials, both serious-looking men in suits. They spoke politely but firmly. "We just want to hear the truth in your own words," one of them said. Amir nodded quietly. As they drove through the city, Amir's mother held his hand, her thumb gently rubbing his fingers. "Don't be scared," she whispered. "Just tell them exactly what you know." At the district office, the hallways were cold and bright. They were led to a small room with a round table, a recorder, and 2 chairs. A woman from the Child Protection Department smiled kindly at Amir. "You're safe here," she said softly. "We just want to understand what happened." Her voice was gentle, like his teacher's. For the first time in weeks, Amir felt like maybe someone truly cared. He told his story again, slowly, clearly, just as it had happened. His voice shook a little at first, but the more he spoke, the more confident he became. The officials listened carefully, taking notes, asking small questions. There was no judgment in their eyes, only focus. When he finished, the woman nodded and said, "You've done something very brave." "Thank you." Amir looked down, his heart pounding. It felt strange to be called brave. He had never thought of himself that way. After the meeting, they were escorted back to the guest house. His mother seemed relieved, but she was still tense. "Do you think it's over now?" Amir asked her quietly. She hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes the truth takes time to be heard." A few days later, the news channels started reporting about the ongoing inquiry. Reporters stood outside government buildings saying things like, "A shocking case involving a young boy's statement has reached national attention." They spoke about corruption, power, and silence. Though Amir's name wasn't mentioned, people all over the country began to talk. Some praised the boy's courage. Others doubted the story. Social media filled with debates. Hashtags like "the boy of truth" and "justice for the innocent" began trending. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, even those who didn't know the full story. In small towns and big cities alike, people were glued to their TVs, waiting for updates. At first, Amir didn't realize how massive it had become. But one morning, as he was having breakfast, his mother showed him a message on her phone. It was from someone she didn't know, a stranger from another part of the country. The message said, "Tell your son we believe him. He's giving courage to many of us." Amir read the words quietly, unsure how to feel. He wasn't trying to be a hero, he had just spoken what was true. But with the support came fear too. The next night, someone knocked on their door late. When his mother opened it, no one was there. Only a small note was left on the floor. It said, "Stop talking before it's too late." His mother's hands shook as she read it. She quickly tore it up and threw it away, trying not to alarm Amir. But he saw her pale face and knew something was wrong. "What was that?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Nothing, just a mistake." But her eyes told a different story. The next morning, government officers came again, this time to offer them protection. "You may need to stay somewhere safer," one of them said. They were moved to a government guest house with guards outside. It felt strange and uncomfortable. Amir missed his small home, his school, his old life, but deep down he knew things could never go back to how they were. A week later, the investigation took a dramatic turn. A local news channel released leaked documents and audio that supported Amir's statement. The person he had spoken about, the respected figure from his town, was now under official investigation. It was everywhere on the news. The nation was shocked. The town that once doubted Amir was now in chaos. Some people said, "The boy was right all along." Others stayed quiet, ashamed of how they had treated him. His teacher, who had first listened to his truth, watched the news with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "He did it." Meanwhile, Amir sat quietly in his room holding his old sketchbook. He hadn't drawn in weeks. He opened it and looked at a sketch he had made months ago, of a bird flying high above the mountains. He smiled faintly. It reminded him of freedom, of hope. For the first time in a long while, he felt light. But the road ahead wasn't simple. The man accused denied everything. His lawyers called it a conspiracy. Some powerful people began trying to change the story. The media was divided. Every channel had its own version of the truth. Amir's mother watched nervously, afraid that everything could fall apart again. "They're trying to twist it," she said one night, tears filling her eyes. "They're trying to make you look like a liar." Amir stayed quiet. Then, in a soft but firm voice, he said, "The truth doesn't change, even if people try to hide it." The following week, they were called to appear before a special commission in the capital. This time, it wasn't just a small office. It was a big hall filled with officials, reporters, and cameras. They promised to protect Amir's identity, but the pressure was immense. His mother sat beside him, her hands trembling slightly. When it was his turn to speak, Amir stood up. His voice was calm, though his heart was pounding. He didn't use big words or fancy sentences. He just spoke simply, honestly, just like he always had. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he said. "I only wanted to tell the truth." His words were quiet but powerful. The room fell silent. For a moment, even the cameras stopped clicking. After the session, journalists outside were talking nonstop. "The boy's calmness surprised everyone," one said on live TV. There was something in his voice that felt pure. The clip went viral across the internet. Millions of people watched it and shared it. Some said they cried listening to his words. Others said it reminded them of their own buried truths. Soon, national leaders began commenting on the case. Some praised Amir's courage, calling for strict justice. Others tried to avoid the topic, fearing political consequences. The case had become more than just one boy's story. It was now a mirror reflecting the truth about society, about fear, and about courage. Amir's life, however, remained simple. Even with all the attention, he still helped his mother make tea in the mornings, still folded his blanket neatly, still kept his sketchbook by his side. But deep down, he knew he wasn't the same boy anymore. He had spoken words that couldn't be taken back, and they had traveled farther than he could ever imagine. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Amir and his mother stood on the balcony of the guest house. The air was calm, the sky painted orange and pink. His mother looked at him and said quietly, "Do you realize what you've done?" Amir looked at her, puzzled. She smiled through tears. "You made people see what they didn't want to see." He didn't reply. He just looked out at the horizon, where the sun dipped slowly behind the buildings. In his heart, he knew the hardest part was still to come. The fight for truth was not over, but the nation was finally awake. The day of the court hearing arrived sooner than anyone expected. Amir had never been inside a courtroom before. The tall white building looked cold and serious, its walls lined with guards and journalists. The air outside was filled with noise, cameras clicking, reporters shouting questions, people gathering to see the boy whose story had spread across the entire country. Amir held his mother's hand tightly as they walked through the gates. She didn't speak, but her grip said everything, fear, love, and courage all at once. Inside the courtroom, everything felt heavy. The long wooden benches, the echo of footsteps, the low hum of whispers, it was all too much for someone his age. On one side sat Amir and his mother, surrounded by lawyers and officials who had come to support them. On the other side sat the man Amir had spoken about, the one everyone in the town once respected. He was dressed neatly, sitting confidently with his lawyers beside him. He didn't look guilty. In fact, when his eyes met Amir's for a brief second, there was a small cold smile. It made Amir's stomach tighten. The judge entered and the room went silent. Papers rustled, microphones clicked on, and the session began. One of the lawyers stood up and started speaking in long, complicated sentences. Amir didn't understand everything they said, but he could feel the weight of every word. His heart pounded as the lawyer on the other side called him a confused child and said his story had been influenced by others. His mother looked at him quickly, her eyes full of silent reassurance. When it was Amir's turn to speak, the room grew still. The lawyer asked him to stand. Amir's knees felt weak, but he took a deep breath. He looked around and saw so many faces, some curious, some kind, others cold. The judge asked gently, "Do you understand that you are here to tell the truth?" Amir nodded. "Yes, sir." He was told to speak into the microphone, and his voice echoed through the room. It trembled at first, but soon it steadied. "I only said what I saw," he began. His words were simple, honest, not rehearsed. He didn't try to make them sound bigger than they were. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to say the truth because it felt wrong to stay silent." The opposing lawyer tried to confuse him with questions, asking about dates, small details, and trying to make him nervous. "Are you sure about what you saw? Could someone have told you to say this?" he asked sharply. Amir looked straight ahead and said softly, "No one told me. I told it because it happened." His voice was calm and his eyes didn't waver. For a moment, even the lawyer seemed unsure how to continue. There was a deep silence in the courtroom. Everyone could feel the honesty in his words. It wasn't dramatic, it was pure and real. The judge leaned forward slightly, watching the boy closely. The people sitting behind started whispering among themselves. Even some reporters lowered their cameras, listening quietly. When Amir finished, the judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, son. You may sit down," he said kindly. Amir sat beside his mother, who gently placed her hand on his back. She whispered, "You did it. You spoke with courage." He didn't reply, but his heart felt lighter than it had in months. Outside the courtroom, news spread quickly. Reporters began repeating his words on television. "I told it because it happened." Those 6 words became a symbol of truth across the country. People began sharing them on social media, writing them on posters, even painting them on walls. The phrase became a reminder of honesty in a world that often hid behind silence. But inside the court, the fight was far from over. The defense brought witnesses, people who tried to prove Amir wrong. They said he was confused, that he might have imagined things. But with each witness, small cracks began to appear in their story. Documents surfaced, messages were found, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to fit together like a puzzle that no one could deny. Days turned into weeks, and the hearings continued. Amir and his mother stayed in the city, living in a small apartment provided for their safety. Every morning they would wake up early, have a simple breakfast, and go to court. The process was exhausting, but Amir never lost his calm. He rarely spoke, but his silence carried strength. His teacher came to visit once, traveling from their town. When Amir saw her at the door, he smiled for the first time in many days. She hugged him and said, "You've grown so much." He laughed softly and said, "It doesn't feel like it." She looked at him and said, "Courage makes people grow in ways we can't see." Those words stayed with him. Meanwhile, the nation was following every update. Television panels discussed him every night. Some people argued about who was right, but most had already made up their minds. This boy's honesty had changed something deep in everyone's heart. For the first time, people were questioning power and demanding truth. During one particular hearing, a piece of evidence was presented that changed everything. A recording surfaced, proof that what Amir had said was true. The courtroom went silent as the audio played. When it ended, the judge looked visibly moved. Amir's mother held his hand tightly, tears filling her eyes. She whispered, "It's over, my son." But Amir knew it wasn't really over yet. Justice still had to be declared. The final hearing arrived a month later. The courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed and the air felt thick with tension. Everyone waited as the judge read out the verdict. His voice was steady but carried emotion. "The court finds the accused guilty," he said firmly. Gasps filled the room. Amir's mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. Amir just sat still, his eyes wide, trying to understand the moment. After the verdict, the judge looked at Amir and said, "You showed great bravery." Because of your truth, justice has found its way. The courtroom burst into quiet applause. Amir didn't smile. He just lowered his head slightly, feeling something he had never felt before. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was relief, mixed with disbelief. Outside, reporters surrounded them again, asking questions, thrusting microphones toward his face. How do you feel? Did you expect this result? What would you say to other children? He didn't know what to say. His mother guided him through the crowd, saying softly, "Let's go home." When they finally reached the quiet of their small apartment, Amir sat down near the window. The evening light filled the room. He could hear the faint noise of the city outside, the sound of cars' voices, life moving on. His mother made tea and placed a cup beside him. "People are proud of you," she said softly. Amir nodded, looking out the window. "I just wanted peace," he whispered. That night, as the news played on TV, every channel showed his story. Reporters spoke about the boy whose courage had brought justice. Some called him a national hero. Others called him the voice of truth. But Amir didn't feel like a hero. He was just a boy who couldn't keep quiet anymore. Before going to sleep, his mother sat beside him and said, "You've changed the lives of many, even if you don't know it." He looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think people will stop being afraid to speak now?" She smiled gently. "Maybe not everyone. But maybe one person will, and that's how change begins." That night, Amir slept peacefully. It was the first time in a long while that his dreams were quiet. The storm had passed, at least for now. The truth had finally spoken louder than fear. After the court case ended, the world outside moved fast, but Amir's life slowed down. He and his mother decided to leave the city and return to their small town. It felt strange at first. The streets looked the same, but the way people looked at him had changed. Some smiled with pride, some whispered quietly, and others just stared. Amir wasn't sure how to act anymore. He didn't want fame. He just wanted things to feel normal again. When they reached their old house, the air felt calm. The sound of the nearby trees and birds gave him comfort. His mother unpacked slowly, touching each item as if bringing back memories from before everything happened. Amir stood near the window, watching children play in the street. For a brief moment, he wished he could go outside and join them, like he used to before truth became such a big part of his life. A few days later, his teacher came to visit again. She brought sweets in a small notebook. On the first page, she had written, "The truth doesn't end in court. It lives in what we do next." Amir smiled when he read it. He didn't know what to say, so he just said thank you. She told him the school had been talking about him a lot, and that younger students were writing essays about courage and honesty because of his story. That made him blush a little, but deep down he felt proud. As time passed, Amir began to see small changes in people around him. In the market, he once overheard a man refusing to lie about a deal, saying, "We all saw what truth can do." Another time, a teacher scolded a student gently, telling him, "Don't hide mistakes. Remember that boy who spoke the truth?" It was strange to hear people talk about him like that. It made him realize that his story had gone beyond him. It had become something larger. But life wasn't always peaceful. Some people still avoided him. A few didn't believe in his story and thought it was made up. Sometimes, when he walked past the older crowd sitting near the tea shop, he could hear murmurs. "That's the boy who caused all that trouble," someone would whisper. Amir would keep walking, pretending not to hear. He learned that truth, no matter how pure, can still make people uncomfortable. His mother noticed his quietness one evening and asked softly, "Does it bother you when people talk?" Amir looked down. "A little," he said honestly. She nodded and replied, "They'll forget the noise, but they'll remember your courage." Her words felt warm, like a blanket around his heart. Months went by and things slowly began to feel normal. Amir started going back to school. The first day back, everyone stared at him, but the teacher made it easier. "Let's welcome our brave friend," she said kindly. The class clapped, and Amir smiled shyly as he sat in his old seat. He didn't say much that day, but just being there made him feel like he had taken one more step back into life. After school, he often sat by the river near his home. That spot had always been his favorite. The calm water, the soft wind, the sound of birds, it made him feel peaceful. One day, a younger boy from the neighborhood came and sat next to him. He looked nervous and said, Can I tell you something? Amir nodded. The boy whispered, Someone broke my bicycle and blamed me for it. I didn't do it, but everyone thinks I did. Amir looked at him for a moment and said gently, Then tell the truth. Even if they don't believe you now, they will later. The boy looked unsure but nodded. That moment made Amir realize something. Speaking the truth wasn't just about big events, it was about small things too. Every time someone chose honesty over fear, it meant the story was still alive. Years passed and Amir grew older. Life had changed, but the story never really faded. It was taught in schools as an example of courage. Journalists sometimes revisited it on anniversaries, reminding people how a young boy had once changed the course of justice. Sometimes Amir saw his old interviews online, his small face, nervous voice, and honest eyes. It always made him smile a little. He finished his studies quietly and decided to work for something that mattered. He joined a community group that helped children learn about their rights and the importance of speaking up. Whenever he visited schools, he spoke simply, never as a hero, but as someone who understood what fear felt like. Truth doesn't mean you won't be scared, he would tell them. It means you speak even when you are. People often asked him if he ever regretted speaking out. He always said the same thing. No, I only regret that it had to happen for people to listen. Those words carried weight because they came from experience, not from pride. One day, during a small event in the city, Amir was invited to speak. It was the first time in years he had been in front of a large crowd. The hall was full of students, teachers, and journalists. When he walked up to the stage, the audience clapped warmly. He stood for a moment, looking at the faces waiting for him to speak. He smiled softly and began, A long time ago, I was scared of telling the truth. I thought silence would protect me. But silence protects lies, not people. The day I spoke, I didn't know it would change anything. I just wanted peace in my heart. The hall was quiet, listening closely. Amir continued, I'm not special. Anyone can be brave. You don't have to face the whole world. Sometimes being brave means just standing up for what's right in your own home, in your school, or at your job. That's how real change begins. When he finished, everyone stood up and clapped. But Amir didn't stand tall like a leader. He bowed his head slightly, thankful and humble. After the event, a journalist asked him, How does it feel to know your truth shook the entire nation? Amir smiled faintly and replied, It wasn't my truth. It was everyone's truth. I just happened to say it out loud. As he walked out of the hall that evening, the sky was painted with soft orange light. He looked up and took a deep breath. For the first time, he didn't feel the weight of the past. He felt peace. The truth that once caused him pain had now become his strength. Back home, his mother waited for him at the doorstep. She had grown older, her hair now silver, but her eyes still carried the same warmth. You spoke well? She asked, smiling. Amir nodded. Yes, I just told them what you told me, to never hide from truth. She touched his cheek and said, Then you've done enough for this world. My son. That night, as the lights in their small home dimmed, Amir looked out the window again, the same window he had stared through years ago when everything began. Outside, he could see children playing under the streetlight, laughing without worry. A gentle smile crossed his face. Maybe this was what all of it had been for. His mother called from the kitchen, Come eat before the food gets cold. Amir turned, took one last look at the quiet street, and whispered to himself, The truth never dies. It just waits for someone to speak it. Then he walked toward the light of the kitchen, where warmth and peace finally felt like home. And though his story had ended for him, it continued to live in the hearts of those who heard it. Across towns and cities, in classrooms and small gatherings, people still repeated those same simple words that had once echoed in a courtroom. I told it because it happened. Years had passed since Amir first spoke those words that changed everything. The country had grown, technology had moved forward, and people had new problems to worry about. But his story still lived quietly in the background, like an old song that people never forgot. In schools, teachers sometimes told the story of a young boy who had spoken the truth, reminding children that courage wasn't about age or size, it was about heart. Amir was no longer a boy. He had become a man in his late 20s, working as a counselor in a youth organization. His job was to listen, to kids who were scared, confused, or lost. He helped them talk about things they couldn't share with others, Sometimes when he sat across from a nervous child struggling to speak, he saw a reflection of his younger self sitting there, full of fear but ready to be brave. His office was small, filled with books, drawings, and a small plant his mother had given him. Every morning he made tea, opened the window, and looked at the sunlight falling on the street below. He often smiled, remembering how once upon a time that same light had seemed unreachable. Now it warmed his every morning. One afternoon, as he was going through some papers, a young journalist knocked on his door. She had a notebook in her hand and an excited look on her face. "Sir, may I have a few minutes? I'm writing a piece about truth and courage in our country, and I'd like to talk about your story." Amir smiled politely and gestured for her to sit. He had done many interviews in the past, but each time it felt different, more like talking to a friend than giving answers. She asked questions about the old days, about the court, the struggle, and how life had changed. Amir listened patiently and answered softly. "You know," he said, "people often think that truth wins once and the story ends. But truth doesn't end. It just finds new voices. Every generation has its own fight for honesty." The journalist looked moved. She asked, "Do you think people are braver now because of what you did?" Amir smiled faintly. "Maybe not because of me," he said, "but because everyone at some point has seen how silence hurts. When people realize that, courage follows." After she left, Amir sat quietly for a long time. He thought about how far he had come, from a frightened boy who just wanted peace to a man who now helped others find their own. Sometimes he still felt the echoes of the past, certain words, certain smells, or the sound of a courtroom door slamming in a TV show could bring back the memories. But they didn't hurt anymore. They just reminded him that he had survived them. That evening, he visited his mother. She was older now, her hands weaker, her steps slower, but her heart was still strong. Her small house smelled of fresh tea and old books. She smiled when she saw him and said, "You're late again." He laughed and hugged her. "Work doesn't end, Amma." They sat together on the porch watching the sunset. The sky turned orange and pink, soft and calm. His mother said, "Do people still remember?" Amir looked at her and nodded. "Some do, some don't. But the truth doesn't need everyone to remember, it just needs someone to live by it." She smiled, her eyes reflecting pride and peace. "You've done well, my son. You gave people something real in a world full of noise." Amir looked at her and said quietly, "You gave me the strength to do it." A week later, Amir received a letter from a faraway village. It was from a school teacher who had been using his story in her classroom. She wrote that one of her students had spoken out about an unfair situation at their school, saying, "If that boy could speak the truth, so can I." Amir read those words slowly, and a small tear rolled down his cheek. He folded the letter carefully and kept it in his drawer. Days turned into weeks and seasons changed. Amir continued his work, meeting new people, listening to new stories. Sometimes he was invited to speak at schools or events. He never spoke grandly or dramatically. He just told the truth as it was. Simple, honest, real. One evening, after a talk at a university, a student walked up to him. She looked nervous but determined. "Sir," she said, "I was scared to tell my family something important, but after hearing you, I think I will. Not because I want to be brave, but because I want to be free." Amir smiled softly. "That's where courage begins," he said. As he walked home that night, the city lights flickered around him. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter and life. For a moment, he stopped near a bookstore and saw a poster in the window. It showed a young boy with honest eyes and the words beneath it, "I told it because it happened." His heart filled with warmth. He didn't know who made the poster, but he was glad it was still out there. When he reached home, he sat by the same window where he used to dream as a boy. Outside, the night was quiet. The stars looked close, as if listening. He thought about how truth had once shaken an entire nation, but now it was no longer about shaking, it was about healing. He whispered softly to himself, "The truth that once caused fear now gives peace." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time, he didn't feel like someone who had fought a battle. He felt like someone who had helped others see the light. In the stillness of that moment, Amir understood something deeply. Truth is not just about being right. It's about setting the heart free. It was never about proving others wrong. It was about helping people find their own courage. The next morning, as the sun rose over the rooftops, Children were walking to school, laughing and running through the streets. One of them passed by Amir's house and shouted to his friend, "Hey, don't lie! Tell the truth like that boy from the story." Amir heard it faintly from his window and smiled. He didn't need fame, he didn't need statues, and he didn't need headlines. The world had already taken his truth and made it its own. And as the light of a new day filled his home, Amir whispered one last time, "May truth always find a voice, no matter how small." That was his prayer, simple, honest, and eternal. Years passed quietly after everything had settled. The noise of news and cameras faded, but the story remained alive in the hearts of people who once listened. Amir had grown older now, his face calmer, his eyes softer. The pain that once kept him awake at night had turned into quiet strength. Life had taught him that time doesn't erase memories, but it helps them heal. He lived in a small house on the edge of town with his mother. The place was peaceful, surrounded by trees that swayed in the morning breeze. Every day began the same way, his mother making tea, birds singing outside, and sunlight slipping through the curtains. It was a simple life, but it felt enough. Sometimes Amir still received letters, some from strangers, some from students who had read about his story in school. Most of them began with the same line, "You gave me courage." He would read them slowly, smile, and then keep them safely in a wooden box beside his bed. He never replied to all of them, but each letter reminded him that his truth had reached farther than he ever imagined. One morning, as he was watering the small plants outside, a man approached him. He looked around 30, carrying a small notebook. "Are you Amir?" he asked politely. Amir nodded. "I've been trying to find you. I'm writing a book about real stories that changed lives." Amir smiled. "And you think mine did?" The man chuckled softly. "Sir, yours changed the way people think about honesty." Amir invited him in for tea. They sat near the window, the same place where he and his mother had once spent countless evenings talking about hope and fear. The writer asked questions, but Amir's answers were short and simple. "I didn't want to be brave," he said. "I just didn't want to lie anymore." The man looked thoughtful. "But do you ever wish you had stayed silent and lived a normal life?" Amir took a moment before answering. "A normal life without peace isn't worth living. Silence may feel safe, but it eats the heart slowly." After the interview, the writer thanked him and left, promising to send a copy of the book once it was finished. Amir watched him go and then looked at the sky. It was cloudy, but soft rays of sunlight broke through, painting the trees gold. He smiled faintly. Life had changed so much, yet some things still felt the same. Later that evening, he visited the river, the same one he used to sit by as a boy. The sound of the flowing water brought back old memories. His fear, his courage, his mother's trembling hands, the noise of the courtroom, and the day the truth finally came out. For a moment, it all felt close again, like time had folded back on itself. As he sat there, a small group of children ran past him, laughing and splashing water. One of them tripped and another shouted, "Be honest. You pushed him." They giggled and continued running, their laughter echoing through the air. Amir couldn't help but smile. Maybe they didn't know who he was, but their words carried something that made him feel complete. On his way back home, he stopped by a shop to buy candles. The shopkeeper recognized him instantly. "You're that boy from years ago," he said kindly. Amir nodded modestly. "That was a long time ago." The man smiled. "Still, people remember. My son learned your story in school. He says you're the reason he always tells the truth." Amir thanked him and walked out quietly, holding the candles in his hand. That night, he lit one in front of a small photo of his late father. The flame flickered gently, filling the room with a warm glow. His mother walked in and placed her hand on his shoulder. "He would have been proud of you," she said softly. Amir looked at the flame and whispered, "I hope I've made peace with the truth."